The year is 2006. We as a country were anxiously waiting for the Western release of Diamond and Pearl, and Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team will only keep us distracted for so long. Luckily, the Pokémon Company can satiate our need for new content, with the long-awaited World Championship event, hosted at the Hilton Anaheim from August 18th to the 20th. And good content it was, considering it was a competition between Jimmy Ballard and the Pokémon trading card game legend, Jason Klikinski. Jason wasn't exactly a household name at the point of this tournament, but he wasn't a nobody. Jason was the winner of the original Pokémon Tropical Mega Battle 6 years prior, and he would still be competing more than 6 years later. Not only was his win in the Hawaiian Pseudo-World Tournament notable, but he also attracted attention for writing about his experience on his blog, which was the #1 cool thing to have in the early 2000s. While his competitor, Jimmy Ballard, didn't have the same rich history, he still had proven himself as a force to be reckoned with. He competed in 2004 and blazed through his side of the bracket this year. Being a father, he had something to prove as his son, James Ballard, was competing at the World Tournament too, taking 6th place in the 10 and under division. In the Masters division, however, Ballard showed himself to be a wild card, using the flexibility of his prized deck, Eeveelutions. The Pokémon Company International described this deck as using its versatile evolutions to beat its opponent. It chooses to describe it like this because of the way that it uses its versatile evolutions to beat its opponents. These evolutions are for Eevee, and that's where the name comes in. By having so many types in one deck, you were able to choose whatever worked best against any given archetype. To get these evolutions out though, Jimmy had to start off with the basics, or a basic Pokémon, Eevee. In a first for the series, we're going to put all 5 of these next Pokémon in the same slot, and switch them out as needed. Each of these Eeveelutions has an ability that is activated exclusively when they are played to evolve an Eevee. Not only does this deck almost always have the type advantage, but different evolutions can be played just based on the utility that's needed at any given time. First off is the main damage in the deck, Flareon EX. Evolutionary Flame makes it so that the turn Flareon comes out, the opponent's defending Pokémon is burned and confused. This is only supplemental by the Stadium Full Flame, which makes Pokémon take double the burn damage and doesn't let them run away by evolving. Then it can use the more defensive of its attacks, Flame Screen, to simultaneously deal 30 damage and reduce its damage taken next turn by 20. When the time for defense is over, it's time for Heat Tackle, which deals a respectable 70 damage at the cost of 3 energies and 10 health. Luckily, 10 health isn't too much considering how much you'll save with Flame Screen. Umbreon EX's ability Dark Ring, which allows you to force your opponent to switch their defending Pokémon with one on their bench, isn't broken on its own. What takes it even further beyond is being paired with Umbreon's Black Cry attack. 1 energy and the opponent takes 20 damage, can't retreat, and can't use any of its Poképowers. With 2 more energies, you can use the move Darkness Fang, which does 60 damage but with no effect. Just like the Pokémon it's based on, Espeon EX is much more of a strategic attacker. Getting Espeon on the field activates the Poképower Devo Flash, which lets you de-evolve one of your opponent's benched Pokémon. This is a more targeted version of a card we've seen before, the Technical Machine Rock, which is also in this deck. Considering how popular it was to use rare candies to skip evolutionary stages, this could be devastating on the right Pokémon. Once you've de-evolved the Pokémon, you can use the move Snap Tail for 2 energies, which allows you to deal 30 damage to any Pokémon on your opponent's side of the field. Last for the Sun Pokémon is the move Psyloop, which at a cost of 3 energies does 60 damage and an additional 30 damage for every trainer card your opponent has in play. The next 2 are in the deck at a lesser supply, but still have just as important of purposes. Jolteon EX is another attacker, having the ability Evolutionary Thunder, which does 10 damage to all of your opponent's Pokémon once it's played. His move, Second Bite, deals 20 damage and an additional 10 damage for every damage counter on the defending Pokémon. This, in combination with his ability, makes Jolteon perfect for finishing off the work of other evolutions. Just like the other evolutions, Jolteon has a 3 energy attack, Thunder Blast, that does 70 damage and requires you to discard 1 electric energy. Lastly is Vaporeon EX, who in terms of human and Pokémon... Lastly is Vaporeon EX, who has the Poképower Evolutionary Swirl, which forces your opponent to shuffle their entire hand into the deck and draw 4 more cards. This could either help your opponent out if they're bricked, or if you play smarter, could completely throw your opponent off kilter. Then you can use Fast Wave for 2 energies, dealing 40 damage regardless of resistance, Poképower, Pokébodies, or any other effects. Or to deal 60 damage with no effects, you can use Hydro Splash for 3 energies. Moving off of Eevees, we get to talk about one of the most popular cards of the time, Pidgeot. Pidgeot was popular primarily for its Pokepower Quick Search, which allows you to take any card from your deck and put it into your hand. Regardless of what deck you wanted to run, it would benefit from a Pidgeot. Who doesn't want to get one card they need every single turn? Pidgeot didn't lack offensive options either, having the 40 damage move Clutch. It also made the opponent unable to retreat until their next turn, which is a pretty good effect for only 2 energies. Going along with the rare candy meta I spoke of earlier, this was the main way in which this card out, not even having enough Pidgeotos to do it otherwise. Better than anything, this card looked so pretty with the energy symbol based holo pattern they had at the time. Last for Pokemon in the deck is one that isn't really intended to be used as a Pokemon at all. Holland's Electrode can be, and was, played directly from the player's hand onto any Pokemon with a basic energy. It would send that basic energy back to the hand and serve as a double Rainbow Energy on that Pokemon. Rainbow Energy was made for decks like Eeveelutions, where every choice you make will result in a different type of energy cost. Being an evolution Pokemon, cards like Professor Elm's Training Method or Celio's Network can be used to find this card anywhere in the deck, making it easier to stock up on those precious Rainbow Energies. On the topic of energies, this deck makes use of 2 more special energies: Holland Energy FF and Holland Energy WP. Each provide a colorless energy and have special effects based on the basic energy already on the Pokemon. FF makes it so if your Pokemon has a fire energy, it has no weaknesses, and if it has a fighting type energy, its attacks are not affected by resistance. WP makes it so water energies prevent all effects to the Pokemon, and psychic energy makes it so that they have no retreat cost. The effects of both these cards don't apply to EX Pokemon, but they helped out regardless. For Jimmy, no effects and no weaknesses were all he needed, as he only put fire and water basic energies in the deck. And really, it sounded like water energies kind of carried, but I'm getting carried away. Let's move on to the next card. Moving on to trainer cards, the Eeveelutions deck relied heavily on the power of Rocket's Admin. Rocket's Admin forces both players to shuffle their hands into their decks and draw a card for each prize card they have. The closer you are to winning, the harder this card will hurt. This card was found in most decks at the time, considering how it can help you out if you've bricked, and help you start a comeback if your opponent has taken the lead. No matter how well you set up your play area, getting your hand reduced to 1 card can make or break a game. Last, but far from least as possible, we have Surprise Time Machine. This is another Rocket secret machine, and following the trend of those cards at the time, has some really awesome artwork by Katsura Tabata. The card is debatably the backbone of this entire deck. You are able to choose one of your evolved Pokemon, shuffle its evolution into the deck, and find a new evolution to replace it with. If you have a Jolteon out but need to use Umbreon's ability, this card will do the trick. The ability to switch between Eeveelutions makes this deck 100 times more versatile than it already was. Also, if your Eevee has less health and damage counters when it de-evolves, it's KO'd without your opponent getting a prize card. Jimmy wanted to prove to himself he could make a deck that didn't fall into any one archetype, yet one that could hold its own against them. With a plethora of special energy, the classic Pidgeot retrieval system, and an army of constantly shifting Eevee evolutions, Jimmy proved himself to be a worthy and intelligent competitor. The archetype that Ballard went toe-to-toe with in the Grand Finals, though, was the Mewtrick deck, run this year by none other than Jason Klikinski. Mewtrick, unlike Eeveelutions, was an actual archetype at the time. I would give the usual blurb from the Pokemon Company, but it really just explains the same attacks I'm going to explain moving forward, so it would be a waste of time. And in the interest of not wasting any more time, let's get into the first card of the deck, Mew EX. Mew as a Pokemon is not known for being particularly strong, but it's known for being able to use any and every attack. Mew EX leans into this with its Pokebody Versatile, which allows it to use the attacks of all Pokemon in play as long as it has the correct energy. It also has Power Move, which allows you to add an energy and switch Mew with a Pokemon on the bench. Considering Mew's whole deal with stealing moves, there were a lot of Pokemon in the deck whose main contribution was adding to Mew's move list, and a couple of those are as follows. Deoxys EX has the Pokepower Form Change, which allows you to switch it with any other Deoxys EX in your deck, but that's not relevant at all to Mewtrick. From Deoxys, we want to look at the move Fast Wave, which does 50 damage for 3 energies. It's not a super low amount of damage, but it also isn't entirely too high. What makes it special is that it cannot be affected by anything on the opposing Pokemon, whether it be resistance, Pokepower, or anything else. Next is Roselia, who also has a currently irrelevant ability, Reactive Aroma. This allows all non-EX Pokemon with reactive energy attached to them to heal 10 health between turns. For Mew, we want to steal the move Flick Poison, which for 1 energy will switch the opponent's active Pokemon with one on their bench and poison the new defending Pokemon. Girafarig has the somewhat specific, yet entirely relevant enough to matter, Pokebody rear sensor. This makes it so each player's active, basic, non-EX Pokemon cannot use their Pokepowers. More importantly though, it has 2 attacks for Mew to use. First is Foresight, which allows you to rearrange the top 5 cards of either player's deck. If your opponent didn't have any consistency cards at the time, you could give them up to 5 turns of horrible draws. It also has the attack Disorder, which for 2 energies would do 20 damage and confuse the opponent given they had any special energies attached. Lastly is the way in which Mew is able to use all these different attacks, Holland's Magneton. It works the exact same way as Holland's Electrode from the last deck, just with a different coat of paint. It will provide 2 rainbow energies to any Pokemon that already had an energy on it. Next is the other half of the deck's name, Mewtrick EX. The 2 moves I'm about to say could be and were used by Mew, but just as often were used by Mewtrick themselves. The move Disconnect essentially defined the entire deck. For 2 energies, this move could deal a decent 40 damage, and make the opponent unable to play any non-supporter trainer cards during their next turn. I love the actual Pokemon themselves as much as the next guy, but I would be lying to say that trainer cards weren't the driving force of this game. Keeping your opponent from playing them locks them down second only to skipping their entire turn. Then you can use the move Mega Shot, which for 3 energies, and having to discard all electric energy on the Pokemon, allows you to do 80 damage to any one of your opponent's Pokemon. This, in conjunction with effects that switch your opponent's defending Pokemon, like POW Hand Extension or Flick Poison, make it so no matter who you're targeting, they're gonna have a hard time. On to the trainers, we have TV Reporter, which allows you to draw 3 cards and discard a card from your hand. There were cards that let you draw less cards for no cost, and even cards like Mary's Request that would let you draw the full 3, but discarding a card was actually useful in this deck. Considering how many situational cards there were, sometimes you'd have a lot of extra basic Pokemon you didn't want, or some even more situational cards that I'll be getting into later. Dual Ball is like the deal or no deal version of the Great Ball card you would see in decks at the time. Instead of getting 1 guaranteed basic Pokemon from your deck, you can flip 2 coins and get a basic Pokemon for each time it lands on heads. When there's so many different basic Pokemon you need to either set up or just steal moves from, this card could make or break things in the early game. Still on trainer cards, now more specifically stadiums, the first in the deck is the Cursed Stone. This card does 10 damage to all Pokemon with Pokepowers between every turn. This synergizes with all of the cards in the deck that allow you to target Pokemon regardless of their location. If you Mega Shot a 90 health Pokemon on the bench, Cursed Stone might be the difference between decent damage and 2 more prize cards. If your opponent doesn't have Pokemon with Pokepowers though, this card is essentially useless, making it one of those situational cards we talked about earlier. Debatably even more situational is the next stadium card, the Battle Frontier. This card makes it so any evolved, colorless Pokemon, dark Pokemon, or steel Pokemon can't use any Pokepowers or Pokebodies. While that's only 3 out of 8 types there were, it was enough to completely invalidate some decks. It was particularly scary for players who relied heavily on the Pidgeot that was fairly saturated in the meta at the time. Make sure to remember how good it is against Pidgeot when we move on to the next section, after we talk about the main goal of this deck. With a large amount of basic Pokemon, gotten out with the Dual Ball, that you don't have the means to actually use on their own, it's evident how much this deck relies on setting up a strong Mew EX to utilize all the tools that they can't. The only evolution, Mewtrick EX, is important for not only locking down your opponent's hand by not allowing them to use trainer cards, but can also deal heavy damage with its Mega Shot. This becomes even easier when they're further locked down by hard-hitting stadium cards like Cursed Stone for extra damage, or the Battle Frontier to stop specific Pokepowers. Let's go forward and see if this well-oiled machine was able to lock down Jimmy Ballard's Eeveelutions in the Grand Finals of the 2006 Pokémon World Championships. For the first time ever, I was able to find first-hand accounts of the match, so as much as I love to speculate, we can actually say what happened, thanks to the blog/forum posts made by both of the competitors. Jimmy and Jason knew each other and had played this exact matchup plenty of times before, and Jimmy Ballard was not feeling good about his Eeveelutions chance, and I hate to say it, but his fears were not misplaced. In Game 1, Ballard is eventually able to set up both a Pidgeot and a Flareon EX against a wave of disconnects from Klikinski, and even gets a KO in, but after Deoxys uses Fast Wave to get past Flareon's defensive Flame Screen for a KO, Klikinski is able to set up a Battle Frontier, essentially locking Ballard out, and he concedes, scooping his deck. The number one thing Ballard learned having played the matchup is to not overstay his welcome. He knew when he had lost, so why waste his time? Maybe he got luckier in the second match? He did. He goes first and is able to get Pidgeot out on turn 1 using Rare Candy. Unfortunately, Klikinski got luckier too, and is able to get 2 Battle Frontiers in his hand, which in conjunction with Mew EX using Disconnect to stop Ballard from counterplaying a Stadium, results in the end of a hard-fought tournament from both players. Jason Klikinski and his Mewtrick deck won out, and with the conclusion of our discussion, I'm going to place the 2 stars of our show, Eevee and Mew EX, into our memory binder. It's been almost a full year since I started this series, and considering how much I enjoy it, I'm shocked that I've only done so few. If you'll have me, I'd love to possibly make this a more frequent series on the channel. Last year when I made the 2004 video, current World Championships were on hold due to the Big Sick, so it feels wonderful to work on a video in a post-Worlds world. I'll be keeping up with the new in-person events, so I hope that you will too. Until that day comes though, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It's free, so you'll always get your money's worth.